I'm trying to think of some clear joke now, but I can't think of any, so we'll get going. So thanks, Chairperson, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to the IGA for asking me to present here today on cows and on grass and on profitability. So it's 2025. It's a decade since quotas went, with 10 lactations done, which is kind of hard to believe. Milk price over the last couple of years, it's been said already, has been as high as it's ever been, probably. But costs are high too. 2022 was a record year in terms of profitability. 2023 was an average year, tight. And 2024 is probably going to turn out as probably the second best year ever on dairy farms, even despite the weather. But not every farmer is capitalising on the good milk prices. There's farmers who can pay for stuff, and there's farmers that can't. I suppose that's why I was asked to speak here today. When Vinny asked me to speak, he asked me to see where are the opportunities that I see for more profit. So in my role with Teagasc, I've had the privilege of facilitating over 14 discussion groups in Munster and across the Northwest, advising lots of great dairy farmers. So I bring my observations from them, from dealing with monitor farmers, and some key pieces of information from the Teagasc knowledge transfer department, and also from the research side of the house. So the ultimate aim, as John said, is keeping as much of the money in the bank account as we can. So during the course of the talk, I'll talk about profitability figures from the Teagasc profit monitor system. I'll address the critical relationship stocking rate with grass growing and profitability. And with that done, I'll address how we're going to grow more, utilise more, and control some of the major costs. And hopefully we'll pick up some practical tips along the way. So firstly, let's take a look at where profitability is. And last year in 2024, Patrick Owen, Teagasc Dairy Specialist, analysed 700 pre-profit monitors relating to the 2023 season. So that tighter margin year, the average year they talked about. And the difference between the top 10% and the bottom 10% is stark. It's up on the screen there in front of you. So the 700 profit monitors analysed, the bottom 10% made €40 a cow. That's €6,000 on a 150 cow dairy farm in an average year. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of risk. On the flip side, in a hard year, we had the top 10% that made €1,200 per cow profit. So I'll be examining what we can do to close that gap. I suppose things have moved on. It's 2025 now. We'll be looking at 2024 profit monitors as we go. There's probably about 300 of them in. We had a lift obviously in profitability with the weather and the milk price in the back end. But what remains is that gap, this gulf in profitability. And them farms in the bottom 10% are effectively relying on milk price. So for me, them poor performing farms are a canary in the coal mine, and I think it's instructive for the top 10%, for us all here today, to see what are they doing that's landing them there, and what are the top 10% doing that's landing them there. And in terms of knowing what puts them there, I'll unpack that as we go. A lot of people might believe themselves to be in this top 10%. Going to a conference doesn't automatically put you in the top 10%. I know a lot of the people in the top 10%. I meet them, and I'm in a privileged position in that I get to see under the bonnet. So it might look nice from the lane looking in, or when you're talking to these people, but look, you'd actually be very surprised about who's making up that top 10%. Initial data. The bottom 10%. Initial data for 2024 season gone by is showing that average in 2023 was about 620 a cow profitability. That average is going to come up to about 1150. Now it's a bit too early to quote that in the media. It's not analysed, it's not confirmed. I've had a quick look at about 300 profit monitors. So the average is going to come up. The bottom 10% though is going to only come up to about €400 per cow in the second best year probably ever. But what's interesting is the top 10% there. Their profitability is going to come in roughly about 1,800 per cow, I'd say. So I'd just like to note again, them figures are not analysed and they should not be quoted in the media. The fact remains though that there's a massive gap, and I'd like to show you maybe what are the differences between the two, and what you could maybe look at the top 10% and the bottom 10%, and know what to avoid maybe going forward and what to double down on going forward. So if we just unpack the 2023 analysis in a bit more detail, and we look at and we look at a few of the farm physical measures. I just want to get a drink for 1 sec, sorry. There was no real difference in stocking rate across the three groups. Basically the same milk and platform stocking rate. We had similar cow numbers between the top and the bottom, and the average. Similar concentrates by and large, probably more than what Teagasc would be recommending in terms of optimal levels of feeding, but similar concentrates from top to bottom. So the worst farms aren't going broke because they're feeding too much meat. There has to be something else at play here. There's a level of purchase fodder across all the groups on average, but there's a massive difference in milk solids per cow between the best farms are driving on and they're achieving good performance in an average year, an average weather year like last year. What I would like to show you though is where that difference in performance is coming from. So one of the major differences is that the top 10% grew 2 tonne more per hectare across the whole farm versus the bottom 10%, and 1 tonne more than the average. So we've got, when you look at that on a grass utilised basis, that continues on down to the grass utilised. So we've got similar stocking rates, similar imported feed. We've got 68 kilos of solids of a swing between the top and the bottom, and this is of people doing profit monitors. And we've got and one of the major differences I think there is the 2 tonnes of dry matter grown extra on the best farms. So as I said, it's coming from grass. The main reason that that there's more milk solids being delivered on the best farms is because there's more grass being grown and more grass being utilised per hectare. We talk about it all the time, grass utilised per hectare being the major predictor of profit on Irish farms. I want to maybe unpack that a little bit further and show the relationship with grass utilised per hectare and the stocking rates. So as you can see in that analysis there, they're both stocked the same. They're growing a lot less grass. So that's where the major difference is coming from, the grass utilised per animal on the farm. And I suppose one thing to note, if you look back at the swing in differences between the top 10% and the bottom 10%, about half of that is coming from output and the other half is coming from costs. And just back to Anya's slides from Mary Kingston, where the top 10% of farms on Mary Kingston's analysis were their costs were 10 to 15% lower, or 10 to 20% lower. We're noticing the same, probably around the 10% lower, with much greater output. So it's simple enough business really. You need to bring money in and not spend as much. How do you lose weight? How do you save money? How do you build your soil fertility? It's all a simple sum really, but we need to unpack that a bit further. So what we need to look at is, if we look at the pasture grown and utilised in graph form, there you can see it just in a visual aspect. There's more grass being grown, more grass being utilised, but the next part is the critical part for me. So the top 10% on a per cow basis or a per livestock unit basis are utilising 4.4 tonnes of dry matter per livestock unit. The bottom 10% are utilising 3.8 tonnes. So that's 600 kilos of grass and silage that the cows are getting on the high performing farms that they aren't getting on the low performing farms. So what would you say? Them low performing farms are actually overstocked. And knowing the difference between being overstocked and being highly stocked is critically important in dairy farming in the current climate that we have of more fertiliser regulations and frustrating weather. So the low performing farms are overstocked, as I said. They've largely the same number of animals or stocking intensity, but they've 2 tonne less grown. And that's where the milk is being lost. So if we can get each cow on these average and bottom 10% farms to eat more grass, that's where I see the major opportunity for profit is in going forward. And I suppose, how do we balance this sum? That's the question, and that's what I'm going to get into now. How do we balance this sum? How do we get them farms that are only utilising 3.8 tonnes, how do we get them up to the target of 4.5 tonnes of grass and forage utilised? Do we need to get rid of a pile of cows? Or do we need to grow more grass? Don't just assume we're taking aim at cow numbers here. So we'll get into maybe a few practical measures that I would see are important for balancing this sum. So as I said, cows on the highest profit farms are eating 500 to 600 kilos more grass in the year. And that's roughly, when you work it out, it's roughly 1.5 kilos to 2 kilos of dry matter per day. That's what it's coming down to. So we can talk at conferences about a half ton, 500 or 600 kilos of dry matter. But we need to get down to the practical stuff of why it isn't happening. So how are we going to do it? We're going to look at spring feeding, summer feeding. We're obviously going to have to grow it in the first place. And I want to maybe have a look at how we pitch that stocking rate, and that's critical. And then I want to flag a couple of things that I'm noticing out on the road with farmers and groups. About people's herds of cows in terms of their genetic potential, maybe a few bits around fertility and heifers. So let's look at achieving the greater intakes of grass. We need to get an extra kilo or two into the cows in the spring. So I'm going to keep this, that little slide of pasture utilised per animal on the right hand side on most of my slides so that we remember that this is the biggest opportunity for profit going forward. If we look at our feed budgeting, we must have enough grass there in the spring. We must close with enough, we must open with enough, and we must have enough at the start of the second rotation. And it's interesting to hear Jodine. I'm very interested in this kind of the psychology around starting to AI, because people get really kind of tetchy and love to get going there at the last couple of days of April, especially down in this country. But sometimes you'd be better maybe holding off. And I know across the west of Ireland, you'd be better off not AIing a cow until you have the May bank holidays over, because we're timing our run wrong with grass. We're running our cows too short in April, we're taking peak off them, and if we're taking peak off them, they're not going to eat as much in the year. We're not going to produce as much milk. We're not going to make as much money. So we must have enough grass in the spring, and if you don't open enough, there was a clear message from Anya Murray at the Teagasc Open Day, or sorry, at the Teagasc Dairy Conference, that if you don't hit that 1,000 of an average farm cover when you open, don't go too hard to start. Because if you go too hard to start, and you have to go in with a lot of silage in April or in March, the second half of March and into April, you're going to affect peak, as I said, and the stuff that's going into, the silage that's going in to slow down cows at that time is not good enough on dairy farms, and we know that. I got a sample or an Excel file sent to me last year from a lab with 500 silage analysis on it, looking at DMD, and when I sorted them for what I would call milking cow silage, anything above 73 DMD percent silage, I think it was 17%, so less than 1 in 5 cows or silages were hitting over 73%. So that's a critical thing. So if that silage is going to be going in March and April, it's going to be detrimental for peak. So we need to remember that, and Sarah Walsh in Moore Park looked at this over two springs where silage went in March, and you can see there that it took litres off the cows. 71 DMD silage going in March and April took litres off the cows the whole way out past peak and into the end of the summer, or into the middle of the summer. And the same difference was there from Sarah's research in terms of the protein percentages. So, and what's critical with this is that if our cows are producing less, they're eating less. And we have to keep remembering that we want to get an extra 500 to 600 kilos, or 1 to 2 kilos per day into the cows. And the best farms are managing to keep the cows milking well the whole way through March, April, May, and sustaining peak. And that's how they're getting high grass utilised. So if we come back to the springtime and we look at this kind of period between the 1st of February and the 1st of April, as I said, the best farms are opening with 1,000 every year, consistently. No ifs, no buts, they do it consistently. As I said, silage has to be good. When the mower goes into the field, the silage shouldn't be up to your hip or your thigh. The sward shouldn't be up to that. If this is going to be going into milking cows, we need to apply the same thinking that we applied to the grass sward that we're giving to the cows during the summer. We need to reduce the amount of stem. Look, you've been making silage all your lives. It's not my intention to tell you how to do it, but what I'm saying here is that you maybe need a bit of a steer, that we need about half of our silage should be of milking cow quality. In our opinion, and that'll be higher on wetter farms, higher on higher stock farms, and lower on farms that have drier ground. But it's still going to end up at somewhere around 40%. Allocations in the spring, I'd say increase them every week. If they eat it, great. That's how you're going to get it up. I would say one place to continue to invest is to spur rollways. Met Éireann are predicting wetter springs. The wetter springs are going to be more likely going forward. I think even on dry farms, I think they're very warranted for helping your grazing, helping getting cows out to grass at a critical time. Feed space. You'd be surprised how many times I come across this where feed space is limited. And what suffers first then? Heifers. Heifers then don't get a good doing in their first lactation. They're still growing. They might take a little bit of milk off them for the rest of their lives. I think feed space, it was in 2018, it was the main thing that everyone said after the spring in 2018, we need to invest in feed space, and I'm still seeing it time and time again. It's very hard to achieve this extra 1 or 2 kilos of grass if there's cows standing behind cows at the feed face. I suppose there are a couple of things that I would say in terms of the practical things about getting an extra kilo or 2 into the cows in the spring. So having the grass there, having good silage in the yard, getting your allocations right, continue to invest in spur rollways because we're going to get wetter in the spring, and having feed space there that every cow can eat at one time. That's how you get an extra kilo or 2, and that's the difference. The extra kilo or 2 is the difference between the worst and the best farms that what we're seeing at now. So if we move it on then to April, don't leave your shelf short in April. That might sound simple, but 20 years ago, being tight in April was a good thing. I often heard that when I was joining the industry. Oh, you need to run the place tight in April, clean the place out really well, and you'll have great quality for the rest of the year. That still remains the case. We're still talking about getting good graze outs here. But what we're forgetting is that 20 years ago, the stocking rate on the milking platform, on average, was 2 cows per hectare. So 450 of an average farm cover with 2 cows per hectare is 225 per cow. We're actually about 2.7 or 2.8 on the livestock units per hectare on the milking platform now. So the equivalent tight in April is actually 600, 650. And what I'm coming across is farms stocked well over 3, start the calve on the 25th, 26th of January, and having silage in from Paddy's Day until the 10th of May. There's a saying, square pegs don't go in round holes. And for me, that idea of calving very early with a high stocking rate and putting average feed into, I would call them Ferraris now. Max Gallagher will look at the genetics of the cows, but we need to time our run with this better and manage our covers going into April, that we don't run tight. There's nothing better than dropping the wire at the end of March or in April and coming into the parlour the next morning and seeing big dogs on the cows and saying, geez, we're into it now. The cows are peaking, we're away with it. And similarly, there's nothing worse than at that time having to go in with pit silage that should be for dry cows or suckler cows in some cases. So look, I'll keep going. Calving day is important, as I said, Average farm cover needs to be managed. You'll do that as you go, but make sure that you have enough looking back and looking forward coming into April. And look, that's your job, no one else can do that for you. But moving into late April then, what I notice is that a warm week comes, or there's a bit of sun in the days, and the jackets turn into body warmers and t-shirts, and hey presto, we're up to 4 cows a hectare. We close the place up, close too much, close too quick. We've been very careful with that too, because that's running people into 5 and 6 kilos a meal and into silage when cows are going into coming up to breeding. So we don't close up too much or too quick. If we move it on to the summer, we need to maintain peak. As advisors, we're seeing a lot of people peak at 2 kilos of milk solids, straight down, back down to 1.6, 1.7 then the following month. Way too much of a drop. And I suppose the farms that are maintaining the peak milk and are maintaining an extra kilo or 2 of dry matter into the cows are managing their summer stocking rate well, they're managing their pre-grazing yield well, and they're managing their paddock size, or they have proper paddock sizes. So I'll just get into a little bit around them and we'll move it on then. Paddock sizes, brand new stuff. It's riveting. I can see somebody's at the edge of the seats there. I was trying to think, how am I going to dicky this one up, or how am I going to make this one interesting or funny, but yeah, I couldn't. But the fact remains, I'm a firm believer, every single dairy farm in the country needs an audit of the paddock sizes. And when I start talking about this at discussion groups, you start to see the stones being flicked around the yard, or you start to see the playing with the grass with the welly, because people aren't interested. How are you going to achieve an extra 1 or 2 kilos of grass into the cows if you don't have the right paddock size? So you've got a small paddock that is kind of in between a 1 or 2 grazing paddock. What are you going to do? You're probably going to either bring up the pre-grazing yield, or you're not going to give them at all. And I think there's an audit needed, and we need to look at your paddocks. It's a paper exercise initially with a map. And look, hedgerows, walls, rivers, roads, they're obvious barriers, and I don't intend to stand up here and be the baron of biodiversity and go to another conference around the environment and we're saying about keeping hedgerows. I'm not saying about getting rid of hedgerows, but there definitely are opportunities on every farm to maybe get rid of a few wires and open up the place so that you can open up the cows when it comes to it for the summer. And my experience of this is that if you have the mindset that all my paddocks are fine, that's the main thing here that's holding it back, because typically they're not. And what's tended to happen is that the pre-grazing yield is coming up. That's a farm there, did this with last year, 50 cow farm that ended up being, after 2 years, it turned into a 75 cow farm. There was 14 or 15 paddocks there on one part of the milking block. We made it up with forgive the handwriting, but we made it up into 7 or 8 fairly ideal sized paddocks. We had 1 or 2 little bits that we had to deal with, like boggy and drains, but you could see up at the top of your screen, up top of the screen there, 5 paddocks now turned into 3. That farm is now going to spend, instead of 100% of their rotation, 21-day rotation in not ideal paddocks, or holding back intakes, or having to move them, or bringing up, they're going to spend now 2/3 of their rotation in ideal paddocks. I'm going to move on. Pre-grazing yield is very important. Your knees shouldn't be getting up wet in the morning if you're putting up the wire. If your knees are getting wet, it's probably 2,000 of a cover. And if we just look at the difference in intake between the two, ideal paddocks are grass there on the left, 1400, you get a total intake of 18 kilos with 2 kilos, I mean 18 to 19. If the paddock, if you're looking at the grass on the right there, heading for 2,000, you're going to get an extra less of 1.5 kilos less of grass into the cows in that day. So look, pre-grazing yield is very important. I might come back to it in a while. Pasture-based data for the last 4 years would indicate that we're taking, that we wouldn't be taking too many surplus bales stocked at 3.5 cows to the hectare. You can see the orange line there would be a stocking rate of 3.5 cows to the hectare, and the green line, the green jagged line, is the growth rate for the summer over the last, from 2019 to 2013. So stocking the place up to 4 cows to the hectare is underfeeding cows. We need to bring that back. What we're looking at here is really only a very short increase in stocking rate, and we need to get back down then to a stocking rate that's going to be able to feed our cows properly for the summer. Closing up area for silage and reseeding needs to be, you need to really look at it and see, am I closing up too much here, or am I closing up too quick? And with the reseeding, would I be better off doing half now and half towards the middle of the summer? If we come back to that stocking rate piece, we need to optimise it. You cannot achieve the bigger intakes that we're talking about if you're not stocked appropriately. If you think about it, how many times over the last 4 or 5 years have you had to go in with 4, 5, 6 kilos of meal? Going in with it like a yo-yo, maybe going in with silage. Now I know the weather hasn't been ideal, but stocking rate, picking your stocking rate on the platform is probably the most crucial thing that you will do on your dairy farm. And I suppose, and if you come back to that pre-grazing yield idea, how many of us are scared when our cows are going into 1400? They're scared of running out. That's a fair indicator. If you're scared of running out when our cows are going into ideal grass, it's a fair indicator that you don't have enough acres under them for the rotation. So, lastly, I would say on the stocking rate, I think passenger cows are holding us back. If there's a cow not producing on the farm, with the way the weather is coming and the way growth has been, there's no room for them. There's absolutely no room for them in the environment that we have. And when I talk about pasture cows, I'm talking about low producers, I'm talking about high cost cows that are calving into calving late and that kind of thing. So in terms of growing more grass, if we take stock, if we look back, the last 4 years, the average production has been 12 tonnes from pasture-based data of people doing more than 30 covers. So average production 12 tonnes. That's back, last year's was 11.4 tonnes grown. That's back about a tonne from the 5-year average, and back a tonne and a half, 1.4 from the 10-year average. So what's your figure? You have to know your figure and set your stocking rate based on that. And obviously this backdrop is, this is on the backdrop of not ideal weather. It's been very frustrating. Had a quick look at Met Éireann, and that's the average rainfall over the last 2 seasons, 2023 and 2024. We had a dream February, the wettest March on record. We had a dry May and the warmest June on record. Followed by, if you look at the average rainfall there from July to April of 2024, July 23 to 2024, we had probably twice as much as we normally get. And we're setting records all the time in terms of what we're getting in terms of wet weather and dry weather. So look, we can't control the weather, and it's no wonder now we have had reduced growth rates, but we can't control that. But what we can do is we control things within the farm to grow more grass. And very quickly going to look at 2 or 3 points then around growing more. So early nitrogen, there have been opportunities missed to get out early nitrogen, and when we're talking about early nitrogen, we're talking about a little bit out early and in the right place. So ground has to be trafficable, no rain, right type of product. I'm not talking about going out with a load everywhere in the wrong type of weather, but there has been opportunities missed. Soil fertility, you've heard this a million times. Someone in Ballsbridge or in Blackrock doing ag science for the first time would have learned it in the first 2 or 3 weeks. It was mentioned at the IGA, the first meeting of the IGA in 1946, spring show with the RAS. You don't need to tell me to stand up here and talk about lime or P and K. And look, but you know you should spread it. I think it's a behaviour thing, and the highest performing farms have it on the brain all the time, bringing up the P's and K's, bringing up the lime. So look, I'd say it has to be the year. You have to use it. An upturn like last year, you have to invest in growing more grass so that our grass utilised per hectare and per cow is brought up. If you're sitting there after probably the second best year ever with a lump of money in the bank account, and maybe the tractor is 02 or 03, And you think, geez, it's easier to go and get the 2025 plate tractor than it is to invest in grass utilising. But maybe some of us need to get rid of Dundee off the phone, I would suggest, and we need to start bringing up the soil fertility. Look, reseeding of silage ground, I'm often brought to the reseeded field, the reseeded silage field. I was on one there about 2 months ago on a farm, and I said, you need to reseed more of your silage ground, it's letting you down. And he said, no, we're doing plenty of reseeding. And it turned out that the reseeded silage field was reseeded in 2015, 10 years ago. And that's the reseeded one. So, look, I think we need to include silage ground in our reseeding brains. And just data from Mick O'Donovan in the 2018 Teagasc conference is that a silage sward is basically spun out, a heavy 2-3 cut system does get spun out after about 5 or 6 years. And so you need to reseed more often. Anyway, I'll keep it moving. In terms of the herd and in terms of interaction with this idea of getting an extra kilo or two of forage into the cows, we need to cull out the passengers, but we also need to weigh the heifers. This is the Achilles heel for some farms. I'm not going to get into it now because we're running short on time and I'd like to talk. Another thing that we need is that we're probably has been proven time and time again over the last 5 or 6 years is that we need 400 kilos of a silage reserve per cow in the yard, rolling from 1 year to the other year, or 1 year to the next. Joe Patton, head of Dairy KT, has been advising 400 kilos for years. When a fodder crisis comes in or any sort of shortage occurs, when you do the back calculations, it's working out at about 400 kilos, and it's hard to say a lot of these, right? So look, just a note in terms of silage and having a rolling reserve. When are you going to run out of silage? April, March, April, or maybe in the summer. Never, yeah, exactly, that's what we want, never. But you're going to, typically if you run out of silage, you're looking at the back wall of a pit when all of the cows are calved, and it's going to be going into milking cows, so you need to think about the quality of that silage. And the last slide or two now, John, sorry. But in terms of the approach to cost control, as I mentioned already, the stocking rate is huge. If you're overstocked on the whole farm related platform, your feed costs are going to be way out of kilter. And your output, as we've said, they're going to be likely to be lower. So make sure you set the stocking rate right to start off with. So that means growing more, but also in some farms, you have to say there's probably an extra row of cows too many. If they're not able to grow the grass, it's putting more pressure on the whole farm in terms of output, in terms of costs. Pricing around. You'd be surprised about how many people will just take whatever price they get and don't get another 2 or 3 prices for something. Depreciation around machines and buildings. After 2022, the record year 2022, we saw a massive, we saw an increase in depreciation of machines. So this idea of getting a done deal off the phone mightn't be the worst idea ever, because you have to think about this from the whole farm scenario. Like, would that money be better off spent on things like feed space, things like slurry storage? I would suggest it is. But just if you are investing in buildings, the question has to be asked on any money spent in the farm: am I tying this additional money up into something that isn't sound already? So, am I stocked at 4 cows a hectare, 3.5 cows a hectare, but I'm only growing 12 tonnes? And maybe you don't need the investment in the first place if your farm is not running at its optimal already. I suppose there's new technologies coming. There's new technologies coming all the time. There's temptations there all the time. Temptations around wearables, is what I call them. Collars, different types of things. Spending on these types of things depends on your own situation. I've met farms that have had debt with the contractor from that's 2 years old, thinking about putting collars on cows. So look, you'd be surprised about some people's thoughts around spending money, but you really have to question, this depends on your own scenario. So any surplus of money, as I'm trying to get to here, any surplus of money from 2024, in our opinion, should be directed towards improving your grass utilised per cow, all the things we talked about there. Compliance in terms of slurry storage, that's where it's at. We need more slurry storage on farms, and putting a feed reserve in place. And then after them three are done, I'll put in making life easier there, because there is a succession thing that we need to think about. So let 2023 be the year of actually sorting your alignment K, reseeding some of your silage ground, looking at doing a bit of fencing, or maybe taking out fences, question your costs and quantities, and one of the best ways of doing that is optimising your stocking rate. So I suppose that's all I have today. The main idea of this presentation is to get an extra kilo or two of grass into your cows every day of the lactation. If you can have that on the brain all the time, you won't go too far wrong.